Hi everyone, so this is officially the beginning of the diabetes series on Dr. Mira Teaches. This video is going to go into the foundation that will enable you to understand what diabetes is all about. In this video, I'm just going to do a bit of physiology and anatomy so that you can get a good basis for understanding what diabetes is. Now, there are three very important macronutrients that we need as humans: carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. Now, these carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids have to get into our cells and our tissues because we need these nutrients for bodybuilding and for energy, right? How do we obtain these? We obtain these from food. So when we ingest them, they are digested and broken down into simpler forms. Okay, so these new macronutrients exist in two forms. They exist as a complex form and then they exist as a simple form. The complex form is what we ingest, and the complex forms are the forms in which they are stored in the body. However, the simple forms are the forms which are found within the bloodstream that are absorbed into the cells. All right, so we have complex forms of these macronutrients and then the simple forms. The complex form of the carbohydrates is carbohydrates. The simple form is glucose. Protein is a complex form. The simple form of protein is amino acids. Lipids are the complex forms. The simple form is free fatty acids. So how do we get these macronutrients to change from the complex form to the simple form? That occurs after digestion. So after you eat these complex heavy meals, they are digested, broken down into these simplest forms, and then absorbed into the bloodstream. So the process of digestion is what breaks them down into simple forms so that our cells can use them. Right. After digestion, you have glucose, amino acids, and free fatty acids floating in the bloodstream. But it doesn't have to remain in the bloodstream. It has to enter the cell so that it can be used. Glucose can be used for energy. The amino acids can be converted into forms that can be stored, as well as the free fatty acids. It has to be stored. So within the human body, things don't just happen. These processes are regulated. The entry of these substances into the cell and the exit of these substances from the cell are regulated by two important hormones. These regulatory hormones are insulin and glucagon. So insulin is what I will call the entry hormone, and then glucagon is what I will call the exit hormone. So insulin is what facilitates the entry of glucose, amino acids, and free fatty acids into the cell, while glucagon is the one that facilitates the exit of these substances. Now, insulin is not just an entry hormone. Insulin is also a builder hormone because insulin will facilitate the entry, after which these simple substances are now built into complex forms which can be stored. So from an amino acid, it gets built up into a complex form called protein and stored. From free fatty acids, you have a build-up, a complex synthesis that occurs, and then from fatty acids, you have lipids. Now, the other thing that happens is that from glucose, the simple form glucose is absorbed into the cell and built up into a more complex form that can be stored, which is called glycogen. You see how it works? So that's the function of insulin. So insulin is an entry hormone and also a builder hormone. Anything that builds up, that causes a synthesis of a complex form, we call that kind of hormone an anabolic hormone. You see, so that's what insulin does. Glucagon, on the other hand, is what I will call the bulldozer hormone. Okay, the bulldozer hormone, because it demolishes or breaks down the complex forms that were built because of insulin. So it breaks down glycogen back into glucose. It breaks down proteins back into amino acids. It breaks down lipids back into free fatty acids. So you see that they do the opposite. So that's what happens with insulin and glucagon. So where does insulin come from? Where does glucagon come from? These two hormones come from the pancreas. Now the pancreas is an organ in the digestive system, and it functions as a gland which has two functions. It acts as an exocrine gland and also an endocrine gland. An exocrine gland meaning that it has a duct through which hormones are able to pass through, and also an endocrine function through which hormones don't necessarily have to pass through ducts, but they can be directly secreted into the bloodstream. So the pancreas is an organ with islands of endocrine tissues. Islands or islets of endocrine tissue. So these islands are called the islets of Langerhans. They contain different cells named after the Greek alphabet. So alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, etc., etc. So these different cells are named according to the Greek alphabet, and they secrete different hormones. Now, insulin and glucagon, we can remember where they come from very easily because they come from cells which are named after the first two letters of the Greek alphabet. That's alpha and then beta. So insulin comes from the beta cells, while glucagon comes from the alpha cells of the islets of Langerhans. Building or generating is called genesis. So if you want to build a protein from an amino acid, you just need to add protein and genesis. So you have proteogenesis. If you want to build a lipid from a free fatty acid, you just add genesis to lipid because you want to generate lipid. So you call that lipogenesis. If you want to create glycogen from glucose, we call that glycogenesis. So you see what insulin does. Insulin does the generating, the genesis, the creation, the building of these complex forms. So anytime you think about insulin, think genesis of complex forms. So proteogenesis, glycogenesis, and then lipogenesis. Now let's look at glucagon. What does glucagon do? Glucagon is a demolition hormone. It's a catabolic hormone. It is a breaking down hormone. It breaks down the complex forms into simple forms. So what are the complex forms? Glycogen, protein, and then lipids. If you want to break down something, you can also use the word lyse, the term lyse, to depict the fact that you are breaking down. So if you want to break down a protein into its simplest form, which is the amino acid, what do you call that process? Proteolysis. If you want to break down glycogen, what will you call that process? Glycogenolysis. If you want to break down lipids, what do you call that process? Lipolysis. So you see that lysis is associated with glucagon, and then genesis is associated with insulin. Because with insulin, you are building, but with glucagon, you are breaking down. But there is a caveat. There is an instance where glucagon is associated with genesis. That doesn't mean that glucagon is creating a complex form. No. In this instance, glucagon is converting one simple form to another simple form. And we call that gluconeogenesis. In this instance, glucagon is responsible for signaling for the conversion of other simple forms like amino acids to be converted into glucose so that the body can use it. So when you are creating glucose, which is a simple form, you just add genesis to that and you have gluconeogenesis. So creating new glucose, so gluconeogenesis. So that's the only instance where glucagon is associated with genesis, gluconeogenesis. So look at the names: glucagon, gluconeogenesis, creation of glucose from other simple forms. So you are not creating a complex form, We're just creating a simple form. So from amino acids to glucose, we have gluconeogenesis. So that's what glucagon does.